Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and Marvel Zombies established a lot of weird facts about the Marvel Cinematic Universe's history that I don't think we can just ignore. I'm not talking about the fact that a quantum zombie virus tore through this reality and caused a bunch of crazy shit to happen with the Scarlet Witch and Hulk. No, I'm talking about what this show tells us was originally true in the MCU before that zombie outbreak began. Because Marvel Zombies operates by the same rules as the What If series, where many episodes, not all the episodes, but many of them, especially in season 1, including the What If Zombies episode that Marvel Zombies continued the storyline of, those particular episodes start in a universe where everything was normal, exactly like the live-action MCU that we knew, until some new or different thing happens to skew and alter that reality into the what if hypothetical scenario that the rest of the episode explores. But before that happens, all of the baseline details established to be the case in the opening seconds of the episode, before that weird thing happens, or independent of that weird thing happening, we can logically assume that Marvel Studios is saying that other stuff is true for the live-action Marvel Cinematic Universe's history. And this is especially important for Marvel Zombies because this show freezes the world precisely as Avengers Infinity War happens, exactly as the history of Marvel Phase 3 was supposed to look like. So we're getting kind of an interesting little snapshot of some other details that were true for the background of that universe, details that could be important for the future, especially if Avengers Doomsday is going to be bringing a lot of this stuff back. So after I broke down the Easter eggs that you missed in Marvel Zombies, in this video, I have gone back through it and compiled a list of 20 interesting facts about the MCU, new details that this series established. And before I get into these details, October 1st, you will be able to watch the very first video essay on our new Witching Hour channel, a video essays about classic horror films. It's going to be Jessica, Gina, and me every week, every Wednesday, revisiting some interesting classic horror film with some peculiar hot take that we have. So please subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the channel. Okay, first new thing that Marvel Zombies established. One, the Nova Corps was not completely destroyed by Thanos when he stole the Power Stone from Xandar. The assumption that we have had since Avengers Infinity War is that the way Thanos got the purple Power Stone, the stone that he begins that movie having, is after he and his Black Order sacked Xandar. Because we know, as of the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, that it was kept in a vault on Xandar by Irani Rael Nova Prime. And there it stayed until Thanos got to it and destroyed it. And it was implied that the only way he would have been able to get to it is by mowing down the entire fleet of the Nova Corps first. This was going to be part of the film for Avengers Infinity War. They wrote out a couple drafts of it, but just due to budgetary concerns, they decided to leave it out of the film. And we've always been wondering what that looked like. Maybe in a future Nova movie, Marvel could show us that flashback. However, as of Marvel Zombies, at the end of episode 3, we see what looks like the entire Nova Corps fleet patrolling planet Earth, or at least enough of that fleet that makes us wonder, where were these guys when Thanos was killing all of their friends? Either way, it implies that the way Thanos got the Power Stone, which we know Thanos had, if when he was a zombie, he had that purple Power Stone in his gauntlet, it must have been a faster smash and grab type of heist, one that wouldn't have taken down the entire Nova Corps fleet. And in fact, after he destroyed enough of that fleet, or whatever their security forces were, to get that Power Stone, after he did get it, the rest of them must have stood down and stayed back under threat that he would destroy the entire planet, hoping maybe that they would live to fight another day. Or maybe this patrolling force outside planet Earth was 50% of the Nova Corps after Thanos killed 50% of the people on Xandar. We don't know for sure, but either way, they were clearly not all destroyed. Today's video is sponsored by Riverside. We've told you about Riverside before. It's an all-in-one recording, editing, and publishing software that we use for every single video we make because it's easy to use and reliable. But here's the exciting part. Riverside just got even better. They have added a new tool called Co-Creator, and it is completely free when you sign up. Co-Creator generates clips, posts, and thumbnails in seconds. It's like having your own personal Jarvis for video content. That means we are one step closer to being Tony Stark, and that is always a win. Finish recording, open Co-Creator, and your clips are ready to share before you even finish rewatching the trailer. Co-Creator keeps you in full creative control. It takes care of the grunt work. Now you can record in studio quality, edit, repurpose, and publish without leaving Riverside. Get started with Riverside today and unlock the power of Co-Creator. It is completely free to use. Just sign up and start turning your recordings into ready-to-share content instantly. And if you want more advanced features, you can can upgrade to 1 month of Riverside Pro free with the code Rockstars. All right, fact 2. SHIELD was active in the MCU from 2018 to 2023 and even had a program called Project LifeShot. So this is a new piece of lore about the organization of SHIELD. It's been a little unclear since, as of Captain America the Winter Soldier, SHIELD, we learned, was corrupted by the organization of Hydra. Of course, the story of SHIELD was explored further on ABC's Agents of SHIELD, but there's been some debate about how much of that storyline, especially the later seasons, are canonical within the movie universe of the MCU under Kevin Feige's Marvel Studios. There was a brief reference to the events of Thanos' snap in one of the episodes of Agents of SHIELD, but we didn't really get to see Coulson and the rest, or any life model decoys of them, get to explore what life looked like on Earth during the blip. However, when the first episode of Marvel Zombies establishes that a SHIELD Quinjet crashes in New York City containing a transmitter for Project LifeShot, that some faction of SHIELD existed not only at the moment of the snap in 2018, but throughout the zombie apocalypse that existed thereafter in this universe. So in addition to my speculation that pilot could have been Fitz, it's just interesting to wonder what SHIELD was up to in the post-Hydra reveal years. All right, 3. This one might be the craziest one. Wakanda has a molten vibranium reactor core beneath its land. Yes, this is a major revelation that episode 3 of Marvel Zombies just introduced as if it was something that we all knew. That was not true in any of the Black Panther films or in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame when we saw Wakanda. This is a completely new piece of information. There were mines of solid rock of vibranium in Mount Pashanga that is in the middle of the Golden City, but in the field land that surrounds the city, now we know that buried maybe 100 feet beneath it is a vast molten core of liquid vibranium that is powering the entire city. That's powerful enough to kill Thanos with all 6 stones and react with the 6 Infinity Stones in some crazy way to release this giant plume of gamma radiation. So when you go back and rewatch scenes that take place in Wakanda, or maybe when we visit Wakanda in Black Panther 3, we have to imagine that there is a very explosive reactor core beneath any part of that city that we see. 4. Wanda Maximoff truly is capable of a global reality warp on the scale of House of M. We've always wondered if Wanda had the ability to stretch what she did in Westview across the entire planet. Now it is clear she does have that power. Yes, she needed some help to do it, but she could get there, and that's really impressive. It's interesting, Elizabeth Olsen even talked about House of M being her favorite Scarlet Witch storyline and thinking that that's kind of important to the character. She mentioned this at LA Comic-Con. Then again, Elizabeth Olsen also said that she recorded all of her audio for Marvel Zombies like 4 years ago when she was under COVID lockdown in a closet in her home and doesn't remember any of the dialogue or any of the plot. She has no memory of doing this at all. So, so that might tell you how much the Scarlet Witch will be involved in future events, or at least events that would be connected to what she did on Marvel Zombies. 5. Hulk is more powerful than Wanda, but Wanda is more powerful than Thor without Mjolnir. Yes, even though they've said Carol Danvers is the most powerful character in the MCU, my money's on Bruce Banner as the Incredible Hulk, because this shows that his ability to withstand and absorb kinetic energy attacks and beatings and whatever you throw at him just makes him angrier and more powerful, so he can't be destroyed. That true aspect of the character in the comics is very much true for this version of the character and perhaps all versions of the character. His ability to absorb the Infinity Stone radiation seems to be based on what we learned about him in Avengers Endgame, how the fact that the radiation that infected his blood is gamma radiation just makes him a fitting component for whatever is released by the Infinity Stones. And it was because he became this anchor, that's why Wanda was targeting him. But in terms of the power hierarchy, Wanda could not defeat him by himself even before he took all that energy in, because as of the ending of What If episode 105, that episode ended with Wanda and Hulk just fighting at Camp Lehigh. We don't know how that fight ended, but the fact that Hulk walked away from it at all shows that she was not able to kill him. And a similar thing happened in Marvel Zombies episode 3 that left with Wanda and Thor fighting, and Wanda, even in her zombie form, was able to defeat the God of Thunder if he came back as a zombie, which just tells us something about the power ranking of these characters in a normal scenario. 6. Blade. Eric Brooks was active as a vampire hunter on Earth since at least 2018, and Khonshu and maybe other gods were aware of him. So in addition to that vocal cameo he makes at the end of the Eternals film, it just sounds like Blade has been around for a while in the background of this universe. But we learned in episode 2 that he does not eat blood. But whatever he was doing, whoever he was slaying, or whatever other supernatural creatures of folklore like Dracula he was pissing off, that definitely got the attention of god figures like Khonshu. Because we learned in episode 1 that Khonshu had been attached to Mark Spector, but Mark Spector was eaten and killed by the zombie plague, so at that point Khonshu detached from Mark Spector and then sought out a new champion and is like, hey, I've had my eye on that, Daywalker. I'm gonna latch onto him. 7, Captain Marvel and the Eternal Icarus are roughly evenly matched in terms of power scale. One of the coolest things we saw in Marvel Zombies was this Valley of the Broken Gods, and I could have spent a lot more time there. It was very cool to see the cosmic caretaker, the synthezoid created by the Celestials, Icarus, just kind of faulty a little bit, or just so driven crazy by this mission, this calling to protect Earth from whatever these threats are, just stuck in this pattern of even destroying things that might just get in between him and his target. Meanwhile, Captain Marvel has been infected by the zombie plague. So the fact that these two are basically an unstoppable force, meaning an immovable object on a normal day, they similarly would butt heads. 8, Kamala Khan's Nani had insights about the future and wanted to send her granddaughter the bangle since she was very young. When we catch up with Kamala Khan in this show, it's 5 years after the zombie apocalypse has begun, which means that Kamala Khan must have gotten the bangle in this reality when she was still in middle school. So it must be true that her Nani was using this bangle that came from the Nani's mother, Aisha, who came from the Noor dimension, in order to herself look into the future and see what would happen for what her granddaughter would have to go through, and realized, oh, this is better off in my granddaughter's hands than in mine. We already knew that the bangle had the ability to tear open rifts in space-time and project Kamala back in the past and create this causal loop where she could save her own grandmother, but there's a lot more to this bangle than we realized. 9, the Raft prison is mobile, and the Raft's prison cells were designed to eject the occupants into the open ocean if they ever got rowdy. This is a small, goofy thing, but we never really saw the Raft move like we see it move here, and I doubt that Baron Zemo had the hardware or even the capability to upgrade it the way it is now. So I'm assuming he just hijacked it from the forces of Thaddeus Ross or whoever else was in charge of it as of 2018 and just started piloting it himself. These ejectable cells make a certain kind of sense for how the Raft would be designed even when the Avengers were imprisoned there in 2016. And that design may still be the case for former President Thaddeus Ross, who's now detained there. Part of the threat that keeps the prisoners obedient is the idea that at any moment, the warden can just hit a button and plunge you out into the open ocean. 10, Baron Zemo and John Walker are meant for each other. It's just kind of interesting that in Marvel Zombies, these two ended up together, because all we really got from them was just some interesting vibes between the live action versions of the actors in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I just think it's interesting that these two just kind of like hang out. You can read into it as much as you want. 11, the Nova Corps must have dealt with intergalactic epidemics before. We come back to the fact that the Nova Corps just happened to be outside of Earth by the time the heroes get out there at the end of Marvel Zombies episode 3. If the Nova Corps is there already setting up this kind of quarantine protocol, it tells us that they know what this looks like. They've seen scenarios like this before. They've maybe sent some scouts down to the surface of Earth to see how the zombie plague is spreading. Maybe some other zombies did get off the planet and they were able to handle them out in space. So this just shows that the Nova Corps, in pursuit of being the intergalactic police force that they already are, must have seen some other kind of viral epidemic that they or other people they've known have failed at containing, so that the Nova Corps knows how to properly shelter in place now. And what I theorize in the breakdown is that maybe the Annihilus forces, that was kind of a pandemic swarm that they failed to contain before, so now they're doing a better job of it. 12, the Asgardians must be bound to live on Earth because of Odin. So this is me trying to fix what I think is like the craziest thing about what we learned from Marvel Zombies, is that the Asgardians chose to stay in New Asgard on Earth, despite the fact that Earth is pretty much a leper colony. Like, what are they doing there? Why did they decide to stay on a planet if they have the ability to get off of that planet and everything else around that planet is filled with zombies that affect them? The only reason I can think of is the fact that New Asgard in Tonsberg, Norway is a particularly blessed land by Odin. Remember, the people of Norway were protected by Odin back in the 10th century. That they had a church dedicated to Odin. That seemed to be why the Asgardians targeted that area as part of their refuge. There may be some kind of special Odin protections around New Asgard. Now, of course, those protections did not exist when Wanda was able to get in there, but I think that says more about how powerful Wanda is than how weak the Asgardians are. 13, Peter Parker can wield Stormbreaker without losing his mind. This is another pretty small detail, but we do see Peter Parker wielding the battle axe of Stormbreaker when they're fighting Thanos. And yes, Stormbreaker does not have the same magical charm from Odin that Mjolnir has. However, Thor did have a very quick line in the early scenes of Avengers Infinity War where he indicated the new god-killing weapon that he would build could not be handled by mere mortals, and if they did, they would just lose their minds and go crazy. So the fact that Peter Parker is able to briefly throw it here shows that Peter Parker is made of some pretty strong stuff. 14, Khonshu is part of the same pantheon of gods as the Asgardians Asgardians. This comes from episode 3, where Valkyrie recognizes Khonshu and can see Khonshu, and they're like old friends. So as we saw with Tuaret referencing the ancestral plane in the penultimate episode of Moon Knight, now we're seeing one of these Egyptian moon gods known by the Asgardians. And like all the gods that we saw in Omnipotent City, they're all part of the same mystical hierarchy. 15. Wenwu always loved Shang-Chi. So as we saw at the beginning of episode 2 of Marvel Zombies, Wenwu transfers his 10 rings onto the arms of his son, using one of those rings to tourniquet the zombie virus that's working his way up his arm, and tells him to remember what his mother said, showing that the lesson of love that Wenwu seemed to struggle to learn throughout the Shang-Chi film that would have taken place after this is something that he knew to be true in his heart the entire time. Also, the fact that Wenwu and Death Dealer got to San Francisco that quickly when the zombie virus took over the city, and that city was ground zero of the plague, tells us that Wenwu and Death Dealer must have been like no more than a half hour away. So Wenwu was keeping an eye on his son, even on a normal day. 16. Yeah, the 10 rings can tourniquet things like the quantum virus. Yes, the 10 rings seem to keep Wenwu young throughout the centuries, but we didn't know that it could stop something like the quantum virus. 17. Kamala Khan, Kate Bishop, and Riri Williams were destined to meet and form the Young Avengers. We never really get to see how the three of them came to be friends when we see them at the beginning of episode 1 of Marvel Zombies, but the fact that all three of them did become friends, despite being in what must have been a pretty dangerous hotspot, tells us that there's a certain destiny that would have brought these young women together to form the Young Avengers. And in fact, in the normal live action MCU, they probably did become the Young Avengers. 18. Eleanor Bishop had a nice mansion using her money from Wilson Fisk that prepared for disaster scenarios. This is another thing we learned in episode 1. Eleanor Bishop, in addition to having her penthouse in the city, had this other really nice mansion that she planned to keep safe and fortified for other things. 19. Melina's mind control technology used in the Black Widow agents is still functional, and it's even effective against Wanda's magic. Yeah, this is a big deal at the end of episode 1, where Zombie Okoye was like, wait, the zombies follow you? And then Melina's like, they follow science. And I think that's an important detail because it seemed like Riri was also using science to hack what we now know was Wanda's signal in the final moments. So this show ultimately does make a pretty strong case for science over magic. And then finally, 20. Anchors are a universal term in the MCU for beings who seem to have the ability to reshape their reality and beings who are ultimately the sole survivors of their reality. Yes, the term anchor came back to describe what role Hulk was now playing in this animated universe, a role that Wanda wanted to steal from him. I think that's going to be very, very important as we approach Avengers Doomsday, and that movie really defines what anchor beings are for the upcoming plot and why they're going to be so important to what Doctor Doom is planning. So we're going to be revisiting this context from the animated show, I'm sure, as we're headed into Avengers Doomsday. Comment down below with your thoughts on Marvel Zombies, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Jeremy Dunham, for supporting us at the executive producer level. Follow me at Erik Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the new Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.